My name is Colton, and hey, it's so good to see you guys. I have the worst stand here, like in the whole world, so bear with me. That's it. Exorcise the demon from this thing. Okay, here we go. No, we're good. I already did it. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Hannah, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, we are in a series titled The Way of Jesus. And what we've been looking at is Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. Because realistically, he's writing them to say, like, hey, you're a church, and here's what it means to have come under the authority and leadership of Jesus. Here's what it means to follow Jesus. And he gives 3 chapters about what that looks like. And then he spends the next 3 chapters saying, like, hey, I told you 3 chapters worth of, like, here's what's available to you because you've come under the lordship of Jesus, and here's what he's done for you. He's purchased you and saved you and blessed you. He's done all this stuff. Asked nothing of you. He just did all this stuff. Didn't ask you to obey commands or anything. He's like, I'm just blessing you with goodness. And then that's how the gospel works. Law works the other way, where it's like, do a bunch of stuff and then God will love you. And the gospel of Jesus is, I'm going to show how much I love you so that when I actually say, like, now follow me, you're going to do it from a place of like, boy, he's loved me so deeply. I might as well trust the man because he's loved me so much and then asked me to follow him from blessing, not to gain blessing. And that's how God works, which I think is really, really cool because it's the exact opposite of every other religion. Some of y'all are in schools that are teaching world religions, which I think is great. You should always learn about other religions. I think it's beautiful. I think one of the main reasons it's important to know about those things is because it's actually really, really differentiates between what the way of Jesus is and the way he does things and the way that every other religion does things. Every other religion is like, come up, do something to come up to me, and then you'll receive me. And Jesus is like, I'm the exact opposite. I actually came down to you to do the thing, to die, so that we could actually be together. Very, very different ways of doing things. And so Paul really breaks into that. And so this particular week, he talks about, like, here's the way of Jesus for relationships. He talks a lot about marriage. And none of y'all are married, at 6th to 12th grade, which is good. Good for you. Well done. You made it. None of you are married. But some of you are dating. Some of you shouldn't be, but you are. Some of you are dating, and your parents don't know, and your secret's safe with me unless you tell me, and then I'll definitely tell them. I'm serious. And some of you aren't dating, and you're like, why, God, am I not dating? And you want to date. But this pertains to you either way. One of the most beautiful things about this passage that we're going to understand is that it's all based on what Jesus has done for us. Paul just can't get Jesus out of his mind. He can't get the cross out of his mind. And so when he thinks about what does Jesus have to say about relationships, what does the gospel speak to about relationships, he's like, well, let's think of how Jesus loved us, and then we'll just apply that to the way women and men should love one another. And really all the people should love one another. And so that's what he talks about in this particular passage. And so we're going to dig in, and it's Ephesians 5, verses 21 through 33. That's what Paul says. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you, also must love his wife as he loves himself, and each wife must respect her husband. This is the word of the Lord. Just a word of warning, 2 words. I love this passage, and there's every now and then I go on a rant about something I'm really passionate about. I'm going to rant for about 30 minutes, okay? Really love this passage, and so if I'm ranting and you're feeling like, is he mad? I'm not mad, just super passionate. Second one, I'm about to read a story that's from the book, The Power of Moments. It talks about poop a lot. it actually, in the book, says the other word. I had to autocorrect a lot of the words. My point is, I am a student pastor, but I never want to do like blend up a Happy Meal and drink it. Gross games. I don't like that. I didn't grow up in the church. I think that's dumb and stupid and demonic. We should never do that. If you come from a church that does that, Lord bless your ministry, but we don't do that. The second thing is, I don't really like fart jokes and stuff in church. I think there's a reason why students are leaving the church in droves, because they never get any Bible, but they get a lot of fart jokes. So this isn't that. I promise you, I'm going somewhere with this. I promise I would not have used it if I didn't think it actually spoke to the current moment that we're dealing with, okay? It's also rather long. Here we go. Open defecation or or pooing in public has dire health consequences. Listen, stay with me. It leads to the mass spread of diseases. Among them are cholera, hookworm, roundworm, and schistosomiasis, something like that. It causes people to suffer or to die. So, in 1999, in order to end the practice of open defecation, WaterAid funded the construction of portable bathrooms in some villages in northern Bangladesh. The bathrooms were built, and they were distributed to the community thinking this will fix the issue. The issue is that it didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. Open defecation was still rampant in Bangladesh. As one expert put it, everywhere I went, I stepped in poo. Everywhere I went, I stepped in poo. An expert had to say that, by the way. This was an eye-opening moment. There's portable bathrooms everywhere, but they're still defecating in public. The World Development Organizations thought that if they just distributed enough portable bathrooms, the problem would be solved, but it wasn't that simple. The villagers instead, they disassembled the bathrooms and used the parts for other purposes. And in one project in Malawi, no one used their fancy latrines at all, and what they ended up saying was like, why would I poo in there? It's nicer than my house. And so that was a problem. So open poo had become the norm in these cultures, and they didn't believe that a better way of life was actually available to them. So what they decided to do was to send a discussion facilitator, just someone to ask questions, that's it. To just ask questions to the villagers about their poo. The facilitator would ask, and here we go, this is where the story really takes off. The facilitator would ask the people, I'm studying the sanitation of different villages in the area. Mind if I look around and ask some questions? Once he had hung around long enough to attract a small crowd, he conducts what they call a transect walk, which leading the crowd from one side of their village to the other. During this walk, he would ask, where do people poo? And the villagers direct him to the common places where they go for poo time. The villagers get embarrassed at these places, and they're eager to move on, but the facilitator lingers there. He points and says, whose poo is this? He asked them, did anyone poo here today? A few hands go up. The stench is overpowering. People are covering their noses with their clothes, but the facilitator keeps asking discussion questions. Why is this poo yellow? Why is this poo brown? The facilitator draws attention to the flies flitting between piles. Are there often flies here? Everyone nods yes. He sees a chicken pecking at the poo. Do you eat this kind of chicken, he asks. More saddened nods. Yes, I do. The facilitator has been trained not to offer advice or opinions. The group completes the walk and stops in a large public space, and the crowd has grown larger, curious about what's happening. The facilitator asks them to draw a rough map in the dirt of the village. So quickly the villagers map out the boundaries of the village along with the important landmarks, the schools, the churches, the streams, and all the rest of it. Then he asks them to put stones where the houses are. Once the map is filled, he points to a yellow bag of chalk and says, sprinkle some chalk on where people poo. He says, where there's more poo, use more chalk. Then there's nervous laughter, and the kids enjoy sprinkling the chalk on the poo time areas. Now, the facilitator asks, where do you poo in an emergency? Say if there's a rainstorm or if you have diarrhea. More laughter as new heaps of yellow chalk are scattered around. Often, at this point, it circles people's homes. Because in the emergency situation, people can't make it to the common areas. At this point, the entire village is covered in yellow. There is turbulent energy. The shift of laughter shifts to aggression in the crowd. They become anxious, disgusted, angry, and they're deeply embarrassed. The facilitator asks for a glass of water, and somebody provides him one. And this is a real story. He asks a woman if she would feel comfortable drinking it, and she says yes. He pulls a hair from his head and asks, "What's in my hand?" "A hair." "Can you see it clearly?" "No, not really." He walks over to a pile of poo near the meeting area and dips his hair into it. Then he plunges the dirty hair into the glass of water and swirls it around. He hands the glass to a villager and asks him to drink it. The man refuses. He passes it along, but they also refuse. "Why do you refuse?" he asks. "Because it has poo in it." The facilitator looks puzzled at this, and he asks, "How many legs does a fly have?" 6. "Right, and they're all serrated legs. Do you think a fly picks up more or less poo than my hair?" "They pick up more poo." "Do you ever see flies on your food?" "Yes." "Then do you throw that food out?" "No." "Then what are you eating?" The tension now among the crowd is unbearable. The truth is inescapable, and this is when they finally realize they have been eating each other's poo for years. Often at this point, the discussion spirals out of the facilitator's control. People are agitated. They start challenging each other. They start saying things like, "We can't continue this way. This is madness. How can we stop this?" Then the portable bathrooms are again offered as a better solution, and they all take to it. They're like, "This is great. Absolutely, we'll use the portable bathrooms." And in that particular area where that story actually happened, open defecation went from 34% in the village to 1%. People are just locked into it. They can't help it. But my whole point, that was long. My whole point was that these people in Bangladesh didn't realize there was something better to live for. They were so locked in, like, this is just what we do. We don't even see the harm in it. This is just what we do. People are dying on the streets. They're like, "I wonder why he died." It's like, I don't really know. I mean, we eat each other's poo. I don't know why. Like, I don't know why he's dying. It became such a norm that they didn't even realize, like, maybe there's something else available. Maybe there is. And so what these people had to do was help them to see, like, there is a better way of life. Your culture is actually gross. And not completely, but in this particular way. And we have a better way of living that will save your lives. It'll be much more healthy and far more enjoyable when you eat your food and drink your water. That's what happened there. And the reason I tell that story is because that is what Paul, in a very opposite, many different senses, but that is what he's presenting to the church in Ephesus with the way of Jesus in terms of relationships. He's like, you guys and your culture do relationships this way. And you're so used to it, and so it's such the norm to you that you don't even think about the disaster that it is and how you're afraid women to go outside and how you're afraid even to get married. I mean, you don't even think about some of the things that are happening. And he's like, there's a better way of doing this, and it's the way of Jesus for relationships. And that's what he presents here. And the reason I wanted to start in such a polarizing way is because when people read this passage and it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands," normally we're like, I'm not listening to any of that. And it's like, yeah, but in this culture, Paul was not offering it to that culture the way that we hear it. We hear it as like, I'm not submitting to anybody. I don't submit to anyone. Like, and especially, I mean, that in our culture today, our culture is dominate. If you want your way, dominance. Be bigger, be stronger, force your way, cancel somebody, lie about them, do whatever you got to do, but dominate. And in our culture, we don't even know what submit is. And Paul in this particular culture is saying, you don't understand the way that you're doing relationships and the way that your culture does them is so destructive. I just want to present you with the way of Jesus. I just want to give you an opportunity to see that there's an actually better way of doing things. And so that's where I want to begin. I want to walk through for girls, wives, and then I want to walk through for husbands, and then we'll continue with a couple of application points. But for wives, this is what he says, the better way of doing things. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Now, again, this can seem harsh, but the religious culture at this time told women not to submit. The religious culture, so church culture in this time, did not tell women to submit. It told them to obey their husbands. And so first century Jewish writers provide insight into common Jewish attitudes about their wives. And so from the Bible background commentary, this is Josephus and Philos. But he says they both stress blind obedience. Women need to be blindly obedient versus submission, and say nothing of a husband's responsibility to love or serve their wife. So this is what they say. For saith the scripture, a woman is inferior to her husband in all things. In reality, there is no such verse anywhere in the Old Testament. Let her therefore be obedient to him, not so that he should abuse her, so that's okay, don't abuse her, but that she may acknowledge her duty to her husband. For God hath given the authority to the husband. Wives must be in servitude to their husbands, promoting obedience in all things. And so realistically, it's like not submit, but obey. And not just obey, but obey blindly. Not to the point of abuse. Like you don't have to obey in abuse, but just do whatever he says in anything whatsoever. That's the church culture at this time, and Paul's not saying, he's not agreeing with this. That's the culture, even the religious culture at the time. He's saying, I'm giving you the Jesus culture of our time. They say obey. Believe it or not, what was worse than that was what secular culture thought about women. In their culture, and just normal, like I don't go to church, I don't do anything, I'm just a pagan. What they saw women as inferior. They were seen as useless and stupid. They were seen as gross, unclean, meant to be used for sex and then discarded. Women were afraid for their lives. Men could abuse when necessary and whenever it pleased them without consequence. If they did get married, it was common for the man to have many other relationships on the side, and the woman could do nothing. And if she ever followed suit, then she would be kicked out and probably beaten, possibly killed. And so this is secular culture. And so in two different cultures, you got your church culture, your religious culture, and then you got your secular culture. Like, well, church doesn't really work for me, and this culture it makes me obey my husband. I'm going to go out here and see what it's like. And they're like, no, it's not too great either. And in the midst of those two things, Paul says, look, I'm not saying either of those things. I'm not telling you to obey them blindly, and I'm not telling you that they're useless or inferior. I'm not telling you those things. Paul says that that wives should be submissive to their husbands. And so he doesn't say that we should be submissive out of inferiority. Paul says submit to your husbands like Christ submits to the church. Like the church submits to Christ. Women are not seen, according to Jesus, as pieces of meat to be used or things that are inferior. Women, in this particular view, women are seen as a valuable entity, so valuable that they're given the equated with the church that Christ laid down his life for. And so he's saying, submit to your husband as the church submits to Christ. He's elevating them in this. We see it as a de-elevation, like a lowering. He's elevating them and saying, actually, you're seen as so important that you're the thing that Christ laid his life down for. Like he's seeking to do that. They aren't told to obey, they're told to submit, not because they're inferior, not because they have no value, not because you're stupid, but because you are a part of the mission and plan of God. And so he's not devaluing someone. He's actually raising the value. Like, you actually have value within this thing. He's equating women to the church. And he's saying that you have value. You're a part of the mission. So if you go back to Genesis 1, before the fall, before sin in the world, in the beginning, God creates, in order, he creates a man, and then he creates a woman, and then together he gives them a mission, okay? And that's what Paul is telling the wife to be submissive to. God has a mission for this marriage. God has a mission for every marriage. And he's saying, in some sense, he's saying, be in submission. That's what submission is. You're subbing yourself. You're being in submission. Be sub to the mission. Be lower than the mission. And so anything that's outside of that places you above the mission that God has for your marriage, he's like, no. Be in submission to the mission that God has for each and every marriage. Okay. Then he says, submit as you do to the Lord. As you do to the Lord. This has been taken kind of crazy. This doesn't mean that you should treat your husband like he's God and you have to do everything he says. It also doesn't mean that when you are married to someone that you can say, I will submit to you when I think you're leading me towards Jesus or something like that. And because then you could just make it sound like whatever you wanted to and be like, I don't think this is what Jesus wants from me, so I'm not going to submit to you in that way. But then when it actually is the thing that you want to do and you think that your husband's leading you to do the thing that you want to do, you're like, yeah, that's probably where Jesus wants me to go. Basically, it just becomes you get to determine that. That is not what either of those things mean. Don't treat your husband like he's God and don't get to determine when he's leading you well or not. That's not the point. What he's saying here, submit as you do to the Lord, it does mean that you submit to your husband as an act of worship to Jesus. You submit to your husband as an act of worship to Jesus. Once you are married, one of the primary ways that you worship Jesus is by being submissive to your husband. This doesn't mean that you don't have a voice. This doesn't mean that you don't matter. What it does mean is that you do follow him. You support him. You give him your wisdom. You give him your advice. You seek to help. This means that your voice matters. Your strengths matter. What you're good at really matters. Who God made you to be significantly matters. To be someone who's submission, who's submissive to their husband, you actually are vitally important to this. You're not less than. You're very, very important. But it also means that there will be times that when your submission looks like, I have to do something I don't want to do. I have to follow someone I don't really want to go in this direction, but I have to follow them. Submission does look like that because that's what the church does to Jesus. Watching him lead and going, I don't know if I want to follow him in that way. We struggle with that every single day. I don't know if I want to follow him in that way. That's the struggle of the church, and that's the struggle of submission in general. My wife and I, Rainey, we had a very, I guess, the most substantial one of that. We have this all the time. Like last night, we had one that was smaller, where I had to tell that woman to submit. I'm just kidding. It didn't go that way. It never goes that way. Because if you actually find somebody that is, anyways, we'll get to that in a second with the guys. See, I get off. But before I came here in 2017, I was offered a job at a school. That's actually under some heat right now. But I was offered a job at a school, and I thought I was going to take it. Like, I just decided, like, I'm thinking of taking this job. I was in a position at a church that it just was hard for my family, and offered this job to go to the school. My wife, she was so excited. She's like, this is great. You'll be out of ministry for a bit and all this stuff. And I was looking to get out of ministry and not do church stuff anymore anyways, and so I'll just work at a school. And the guy called, offered me the job, and I was like, look, man, I'm going to talk to my wife, and I'm going to pray, but I'm pretty sure I'm taking this thing. And so I talked to Rainey, and she's like, yes, this is going to be so great. We've been waiting for this for so long. It's been 6 months in the waiting of this. And so then I go home to pray about this thing, and man, it was just the weirdest thing. But I was like, I heard God tell me, like, this is not what I have for you. And I was freaked out because I was like, I really want to take this job. And then secondly, I was freaked out because, like, my wife's going to kill me for not taking this position. Like, if I go to her with, like, God said I shouldn't do it, she's going to actually slit my throat. That was too harsh. Sorry, she wouldn't do that. But I did. I went to Rainey, and I was like, listen, I'm really sorry, but I was praying, and the Lord told me that, like, he actually wants me to stay in ministry. Like, this is what he wants from me, and I have to say no to this job. And I've already said no to it because I called the guy earlier and did it, and man, she was mad. And she was sweet and kind, but just heartbroken of, like, we're in such a difficult spot right now. Why would you say no to a job when we're in such a difficult spot? And I was like, Rain, I swear, I promise, like, I prayed, and he answered, like, I wanted that job too. I'm just telling you, he told me no. And she was, just wonderful, but just true to this, to go like, this doesn't make any sense, but I'm just trusting that the Lord is actually leading you in the right direction. And then in her way, in submitting to my leadership in that, she was saying, Jesus, I'm worshiping you. I'm trusting you in this. And it was an act of worship that Jesus received because she chose to be submissive to me. And then 2 weeks later, I got in contact with Gibb, and I started talking to him about taking this job. And now she's thrilled. She's, me too. I love this job. But anyways, that's a story just to show that, like, this practically is something that's happening. My wife does so well at that and just worships Jesus by being submissive to me, which is something I do not deserve. But she does it as an act of worship to him. And so the point is that when you get married, one of your primary acts of worship is to be submissive to your husband. And so practically, this should substantially change who you date. This should substantially change who you date and who you marry. If you don't think you could submit to him, don't date him. If you don't think that he will lead you well, don't date him. If you don't think he can guide your family wisely, bail on that deal. If you think that he'd sit around and watch football and play video games instead of sacrifice for your family, let him marry someone else. Don't marry that man. Don't date him. It should change who you date. Because if you're actually interested in following Jesus, if you're actually like, with my life, I want to give my life for this man, then it's going to come down to eventually, if you end up getting married, if that's what the Lord has for you, one of your primary ways of worshiping Jesus will be submitting to your husband. Not domineering him, because this is very, very clear. Not domineering, but taking a submissive role to the mission that God has for you and the created order of things, that man was created first and then the woman. They're so vitally important, but there is a role there. And so one of your primary ways of doing that is actually submitting to him, and it's a way of worshiping Jesus. And so if you're dating someone and you're like, there's no way in the world, you're a moron, I couldn't ever submit to you, deuces, we're done here. I don't want to lock myself into something that then I'm looking at you going like, he's going to spend all of our money in Las Vegas. Like, my kid's going to have a college fund, and he's going to spend it on video games. What an idiot. Like, don't date that guy. Don't do that, okay? Once you choose him, you begin to honor and follow Jesus by submitting to that man. One of the commentators said, a woman should take great care in who she chooses as her husband. Instead of looking for an attractive man, instead of looking for a wealthy man, instead of looking for a romantic man, a woman should first look for a man she can respect. Super important. If you date and marry wisely, it will be easy to submit to that husband because of what Paul says next. If you date and marry wisely, it will be easy for you to submit because Paul says, husbands, now love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In our culture, in our current time, when we hear that wives have to be submissive to our husbands, it strikes harsh. It's like, I don't want to be submissive. But in this culture, this is what would have stood out to them. Wives have to submit. I have to die. Like, I got to submit. He's calling me to death. As Jesus loved the church, he gave his life for the church. The men would have heard this and be like, like now in our culture, it's like, wives, submit to your husbands. And everybody's like, you get off the stage. But like back then, someone says, and husbands, be willing to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And they're like, cool. Wait. I have to, what? Like, that's how it would have hit them. They would have been like, yeah, could you read that back? Like, can we run it one more time? Paul tells the wives to submit, but he calls the husbands to die. And if a husband is willing to die for you, wives, girls, if you know this man is willing to die for me, he presents an opportunity where submission becomes a thing that you don't even think about. And that's why Paul says this. Lay down your life for her as Christ laid down his life for the church. This idea did not exist in this culture. Florence DuPont, in his book on marriage and Roman culture, says this. He says, the absence of this kind of love that Paul describes as essential in marriage is well illustrated by the attitude of Aemilius Paulus toward his wife. Aemilius Paulus had married Papyria, daughter of a former consul. Papyria was the perfect wife. She gave her husband 2 sons, both of whom proved exceptional men. Socially, she was everything that you would expect of her. She was beautiful, virtuous, and fertile. Aemilius Paulus, however, decided to divorce her. Why, he was asked. Is she not discreet? Is she not beautiful? Is she not fruitful? Aemilius Paulus then held out his shoes, saying, is this not handsome? Is it not new? But not one of you can see where it pinches my foot. And so he married another woman. The story ends kind of strange, but notice that he compares this woman to his shoe. Not strong. You dating somebody that's comparing you to their shoe? Bail on that deal. We're out here. We're done. Walk away from me. Or get your dad to chase them away. I don't care how it happens. Get away from me. But that was the common way to treat women. Men were rewarded for, it's confusing, it doesn't make any sense, but it's like, no one's saying it, no one's stopping them. This is how you can treat women. But Paul says in the church, husbands, the way of Jesus is so much better. This is why the church grew primarily with women in the first century, because they saw men who treated their wives well. It's like, you stay with your wife and you don't have relationships with other people? This is amazing. I've never seen anything like this in our culture. And the women are like, I got to know what's going on inside that building. And so the church grew. Paul says in the church, the way of Jesus, love her as much as Christ loved the church. He uses the word agape. You've heard this a lot, but agape love is defined as sacrificial, giving, absorbing love. The word has little to do with emotion. It has much more to do with self-denial for the sake of another. It is a love that loves without changing. Agape love is a self-giving love that gives without demanding or expecting repayment. I love you not to get something. I love you because I love you. It is a love so great that it can be given to the unlovable and the unappealing. It is love that loves even when it's rejected. Agape love gives and loves because it wants to. It does not demand or expect repayment from the love given. It gives because it loves. It does not love in order to receive. And this is what Paul is saying. This is how you should love, as Christ loved the church. Christ loves the church, and the church does not love him back the same way. We are in the church right now. He loves you enough to give his life for you, and some of you are still trying to figure out if you love him at all. But he still loves you. Hard to imagine, it's hard to understand. But this is the love that he's calling men to love their wives with. Then he says this, to make her holy, love her as Christ loved the church, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Basically what he's saying is like, give your life for her, and so love her so well that your love makes her feel beautiful inside and out. Love her so well that it heals her fears, that it strengthens her faith, that it presses her more and more into Jesus. Love her that way. Love her so well that people see it, and like when they hear of her, when they hear you talk about her, they're like, I think I love this woman. Like that's how you should love your wife, with your words so much that other people begin to love her, with your actions so that so many people are like, she must be the most important person in the world. She might be royalty the way that this man loves her. Love them that way. People should watch how you love her and be amazed. This is how much Jesus has loved the church, by doing whatever it took to do it. And there's no doubt, the songs that are written, the generations that have changed, Jesus has loved the church well by giving up his life. It says washing her through the word. That idea is not logos, which is like reading the word, but it's rhema, which is to embody the word. The idea here is that you should be so impacted in embodying the gospel that Jesus just flows out of you into your life and into your marriage. It's one thing to have Bible verses written on the wall, which a lot of Christian families do, but they don't live any of it at all. This is the opposite of that. Who cares about what you can write on the wall? Anybody can write things on the wall. What do you live out from your soul? And he's like, that's what Jesus was the Word made flesh. He was actually embodying the gospel, and people experienced that. And he's saying that's the way men should love their church. They should be so close to Jesus that what flows from their heart is Jesus to the people that's near them. That's the way the marriage should look like. And then he says, for this reason, very important phrase, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And so what he says, for this reason, for the reason is for the reason of laying down your life. And so the idea is that when a man is ready and understands, I am ready to lay down my life for my bride, then he will leave father and mother and be joined to his wife. The idea is until you're ready to die for the woman, do not marry her. And until you have it in your heart that like, I could absolutely, and not just like, I would cross an ocean for you. Not that. That's garbage. Don't do any of that. Until you really believe like I think I could actually die for you. I think I'd give my life for you. Until you get to that space, do not marry her, because marriage is hard. Marriage is difficult, and she deserves a love like that because Jesus has loved the church that way. When you're ready to lay down your life, then you can get married. That's what Jesus did. Jesus left his home because he was willing to lay down his life for the church. He left father and mother, if you call the Spirit the mother. He left father and mother to be joined to his bride, the church, by laying down his life for it. Paul says that's the only reason to get married. So, practically, for guys in marriage, walk into marriage very slowly. Look at your relationships and walk into those things very slowly. If you're dating someone and you're like, I really only like you because you're hot, I really only like you because of what I get out of this deal, that's not love, that's not agape, that's a feeling. That's like I'm just passionate about good-looking things. That's not what this is. We will do this imperfectly, but you should go into relationships with someone that you're like, I'm learning and seeking to figure out, can I lay down my life for you? Is that why you're getting married? Whenever I talk to married couples, if I ever do their counseling or anything like that, if I ever do a wedding, I use this passage because I think it describes very clearly, men, as you enter into marriage, should tremble. Should be a little like, am I ready for what I'm about to do? Do I understand the gravity of what I'm entering into? And the truth is, no one does at the moment. It's about 10 years in, you're like, do I understand the gravity of what I just got myself into? It takes a bit. But what Paul is saying is like, they deserve to be loved this way. Love them this way. So if you feel like you can only serve her when she's pretty, don't marry her. If you feel like you can only be kind to her when you feel like it or when she's nice to you, don't marry her. If you feel like you will be held accountable, you will be held accountable for this particular decision. And when you get married, if that's what Jesus has for you men, when you get married, one of your primary ways of loving him will be by loving her as Christ loved the church. One of the primary ways of worship won't be on your knees in prayer, hands raised in worship, because anybody can do those things and hate their wives. It happens all the time. It happens in this room here. It happens where people are like just worshiping Jesus out the frame, but at home they're cruel. At home they do not love. They can lift. It's easy to lift the hands to Jesus like this and then to go and do other things with other women versus your wife. It's easy to lift your hands like this and then to go back home immediately, use those hands to turn on porn. It's super easy to do those things. Very, very difficult to actually understand that, like, hey, you worship Jesus primarily, not here, but by loving that person that you've claimed to love as Christ has loved the church. Consider how you love. Go into marriage very slowly. The way of relationships that Jesus offers to people is completely different than the way culture has always dated or married, but it's actually been proven recently that it's been proven to be the most effective way of dating and relationships, okay? So non-Christians proved it, but they're just proving the Bible and they didn't realize they did it, okay? So I have a chart here. Love this chart. This chart basically, I know it's bright. This chart basically says this. It's like people who get married, notice it's over the time of 60 years. People who get married because they're just super attracted, I'm just super passionate, and that's the dotted line at the top. That's their passion level. Just like, we got married, I'm so passionate for you, you're so pretty, you're so handsome, I love you so much, this is amazing, we're so good together, da-da-da. And then people who get married because they're just like, look, I respect you, you love me, we're kind to one another, I think you're great, let's get married. That kind of thing. Look at passion as it goes over 60 years. About 10 years in is where it happens, where passion, once you get married, dwindles hard and fast. Just straight down. And then about year 10, those two things meet up. And what that means is that for 10 years, a person who married out of passion alone, their passion for their spouse has been plummeting for 10 years. Whereas the other one, just married because mutual submission, mutual love for one another, mutual respect for one another, theirs has been climbing very slowly, but climbing. Their passion has been climbing slower and slower and slower for 10 years. The difference in 10 years of plummeting passion and the difference in slow growth passion. And then if you notice, over the span, the companionate couples, the ones that were like, I'm choosing to marry you out of mutual respect and mutual love, versus like, let's just get married and go to Vegas and do this thing. You're so pretty. I just want to, like, can't wait to have sex. Can't wait to, like, all of a sudden what you see is that passion continues. It spikes here and there. Normally it's because different stages of life or, affairs or children being born or whatever. And then all of a sudden it just dwindles out. But the other one continues to grow. And this was a non-Christian that proved this, like studying people over time. And Jesus is like, this is how I'm calling you to love. All right. A couple of thoughts for us as a community here in LH students, for the girls. Consider who you're dating and consider how you date. In my experience, and I said this in the prayer room and I say it a lot, in my experience, girls settle a lot. They settle way too easily for guys that are just terrible, just bad. I was in a coffee shop the other day, and I was not paying attention to anything that was going on because I was writing messages for Rally Weekend. But a song ended, and I heard on my earbuds, and then I heard this girl say something, and what she said was, the next time I date a guy, and I was like, well, I got to see what she says. Click, and I paused my sound. And I'm just looking straight ahead, but I'm locked in right here, okay? Just seeing, and she's talking to apparently a friend. Sounded more like an enemy, but who knows? And the girl says, when the next time I date a guy, I'm going to deny, Hannah, we're not going to do the song, don't worry about it. The next time I date a guy, I'm going to not let him know who I actually am. Like, I'm just going to hide all of that and just be whatever he wants me to be, because it seems that when I reveal who I am to guys, they get scared off and they run, or they think it's too serious because they got to know me too deeply and they leave. And so the next time I date a guy, I'm just going to be whatever he wants me to be. And I was thinking, like, certainly that girl's going to be like, oh, friend, don't do that. That's no good. And she was like, that's what you got to do. That's what you do. And I was like, I was like, I'm not supposed to be listening. But I was like, this is the worst advice I've ever heard. Like, why would you settle for that guy? Like, who are you dating? These monsters. Like, what is wrong with you? And she was so sweet. She brought me 2 free drinks. I was like, you're the best. You should, like, guys should be lining up. You'll be fine. Stop dating and settling for these people. Jesus would never, he loves you as he loved the church. You deserve someone to love you that way. And I don't know if that one's called to a life of singleness or whatever, but that's not the way. And so consider who you're dating. Do not settle for, they're like, well, it's just been a long time. I'm like, you're 16. You're 17, 18. Like, it hasn't been a long time. You got plenty of time. Go slow. Consider who you date. And consider if you can actually be submitted. Can you worship Jesus by being married to them? Men, we got to do better. Guys, how are you loving? How are you loving the people you're dating now? Are you interested in actually laying down your life for people? Are you just interested in what you can get out of the relationship? I just want to get a girlfriend so that we can make some really bad mistakes. I just want to get a girlfriend so I can post about it on social media. All my friends have girlfriends and they post. I don't really have any. Nobody cares, man. Don't do that. Relationships are more important than that. Jesus clearly says that you can worship him through them and because of them. Consider how you love. The last place, I think, where we need to work on submission is, and this is very specific, and so we can talk later if you get mad at me, but the last place where I think we need to work on this is the middle school guys small group. I love you guys, for real. Some of you I barely know. I'll get to know you a lot more at Rally Weekend. But in the middle school guys small group, you guys are not submissive to your leader. first verse in this whole thing was, be submissive to one another. Go back to it, Kyle, the very first slide. Be submissive. Submit to one another. This is the whole idea. Be submissive to one another. You guys are not submissive. You have a leader in Troy who's here week in, week out. Jacob, who's here week in and week out. And from what I understand, some of y'all get kicked out of the room quite a bit because you're not submissive. You're actually usurping authority, and you're claiming the influence, and you're taking all of that for yourself. That is not how you're supposed to live. So, my encouragement to you is to work on submitting to one another. Work on submitting to the leader who's chosen to give his spare time, both of their spare time. They're not paid for this. They're doing this because they actually believe that Jesus will transform your life and make it far better than what you can do on your own. And they've had experiences they want to pour into you and all those things. And so when you do not submit to that, you're not weaker, you're not stronger, you're actually weaker. You are a very weak person to not sit for 30 minutes and just have somebody ask you questions. And you don't have to do push-ups for 30 minutes. You don't have to do anything for 30 minutes, but just listen in silence if you have nothing to say. Work on submitting to those in authority over you. The reason we do this, the reason we do all of that, is because Jesus has called us to do that. This is what he did. The only person in the universe that would never have to submit to anything chose to submit in all things, to lay down his life so that you could actually experience freedom and beauty and glory and forgiveness of sin and freedom from all of those things, all the stuff that we hate. He's like, I hate those things too. I want to help you get rid of those things. The reason we submit is because he did it for us, and so we're supposed to respond in kind. So my encouragement to you, girls, guys, middle school guys specifically, consider how you submit. Consider how you love, and consider how you submit to one another, because it's worship to Jesus when we do it, because we're actually acting like him in that way. Let me pray. Father, thank you that you were submissive even to death on a cross. That submission to you was not some small thing, but it actually required your blood. It required being whipped. It required your bones being exposed. And it required nails in your hands and nails in your feet. And so, God, I pray that our submission will be worship to you as we submit to one another, as we submit one day to future spouses, and as we love like you loved. Help us to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, go to small groups. I'm gonna dance with all my